Welcome to Relatable Wisdom, the podcast where real people share timeless ideas. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and in every episode we dive into the philosophies, quotes, points, and life lessons that shape how we live, think, and grow. No matter where you are in life, this show is here to remind you wisdom is everywhere, and it's always relatable most of the times.
Today's guest is Jeffrey Kildow, a writer and history enthusiast. He's joined us from a little in Colorado. Jeffrey has been guided by the powerful idea that those who don't understand his history are bound to repeat it. That belief, formed in his teenage years, has sparked a deep curiosity about the past and shaped the way he sees the world today. He's preparing to release his novel, Menace, an alternative history of World War II that explores how different choices could have reshaped the course of events. In this conversation, we'll explore how history shapes ideas, identity, how stories preserve lessons, and why looking backward might be one of the smartest ways to move forward. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're welcome. Your quote is often phrased as those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. What does this quote mean to you beyond the textbook definition?
Well, it's a warning, basically, that you need to understand where you came from so you can successfully go where you're going. Often each generation believes that they have all the wisdom. And as we get a little older, we find out that's not the case, that those who went before us made mistakes similar to ours that we could have avoided had we known about them. And that's where history comes in.
Well, those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. You said as a teen you believed this was an absolute truth. Was there a specific moment or experience that made it real for you?
I wouldn't say it's an absolute truth, but it certainly is significantly true. Let's say it that way.
Okay.
One of the big things that was learned in World War II is concerning the attack on Pearl Harbor, for example, is you should not underestimate your potential enemies.
Yeah.
It's really easy to do. It's I know what I have and I think I know what they have, and so I'm safe. Wrong.
Yeah.
Far better to overestimate their capabilities. Then
Yeah.
that's a pleasant surprise.
Well,
And that holds true even today.
yeah.
And
Of course.
that's why various nations are engaged in arms races.
Yeah. Everybody's like, who has the biggest toy?
That's right. I got to have the biggest stick,
Yeah. Yeah. Look, when I look at it sometimes it looks as though it's like kids, right? And you're like, oh yeah, my stuff is bigger than yours. Like,
That's not a bad assessment. And yes, I think that analogy applies often. Yeah.
yeah. How has your understanding of this quote evolved as you've grown older?
Oh. Okay. Let's see. I'm thinking originally that when I read it, I thought it was foolishness. As a young man, I'm talking about. When we're young, we all too often have too great an opinion of ourselves and what we think we know. And as I got older and actually exposed myself to as much history as I have, which is quite a bit, I came to realize that there's significant amount of truth in that old saying. And the only way you would know that is if you knew what happened before.
Yeah.
And sadly, in our country, history is neglected way too much in the schools, in my opinion. And those who have an interest in it will pick it up. But it's something that I think everybody ought to have in their pocket, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, why do you think? And it's the same as the case here. I think history doesn't even make it to the high school education, and I'm like, why is that? Because then, what's an example of a course that I feel it's not even as important as history? Like, I think it's a market. There's a course called marketing. They make it compulsory, and history is not compulsory. And I keep asking why.
I think this is very much my personal opinion, okay? I think one of the problems is the way that history is written. A lot of professional historians write in a very dry, impersonal way, and they're more impressed with numbers and facts and not impressed with the people and why they did what they did and how they managed to accomplish what they did.
why do you think people overlook history even though it carries so many lessons?
Well, I suspect that at least part of it, I'm thinking from my own experience in public schools, that, the older students gripe about how boring history is and how boring the teacher is. And, all they have to do is memorize some dates and some numbers, and they don't have any appreciation for the significance of what they're trying to be taught. So I think
Yeah.
there's failures on both sides of it. I think it's taught poorly, and then the students don't have an appreciation for what's being presented to them.
Yeah, and in most cases, the students are not even given a choice. I mean, if doesn't even make it up to the curriculum and all that, people don't even get to decide if they like history or not. I mean, it's like every other courses. There's mathematics, there's English, right? People love math, people hate math, but at least you're introduced to math, right? Now, of course, I'm not saying that history is more important than math, or math is more important than history, but I'm just saying that people have to be introduced to it before they can choose to like or hate a thing.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Yes, I would agree
Yeah.
with that fully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we're
Eh,
looking at people making mistakes because they're not even aware of history, what patterns from history do you see repeating in today's world?
Well, you don't have to go back very far in history to start seeing a pattern that's frequently repeated, and that's one nation or another will begin to build up in power, and they're either ignored or underestimated by anybody around them, and suddenly there's a burst out, and then you have a war. That's been repeated more times than I could count. I mean, just in Europe alone, and it's true, I think, anywhere there's people, we tend to fight each other. I know,
Yeah.
something about the human psyche, I guess.
Conflicts where there's people, there's
Yes,
bound
yes.
to be conflict. I'm
And
curious. How did
I was
you?
going to say constant power struggles. Everybody's trying to
Yeah.
be top dog, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that fascinates me is when there's an impasse.
There's an impasse.
Yeah.
You explain that a little bit? I'm
Okay.
curious.
Maybe I'm not pronouncing it well. Well, it's basically when two big dogs refuse to agree to to either. So I say I want this, you say you want this, and there's no way to. You say I say you agree to me, you say you agree to. It's spelled IMPASSE. I'm not
Yes.
sure I'm
Okay.
pronouncing it well. Yeah.
Impasse.
Yeah.
Yes. That can happen sometimes when groups or nations are pretty equally matched, where one can't come out on top of the other.
Yeah.
And there's only a couple of ways that can be resolved. Either they're going to have to come to an agreement and say, okay, we'll leave it right here in the status quo, and we'll keep an eye on each other. Or one of them is going to have to figure out some way to increase whatever power they see is lacking so they can overtake the other one. I mean, and neither of those choices are easily made.
Yeah.
And somehow we always seem to default for fighting rather than getting along. That's a sad commentary.
Yeah, I mean, getting along in most cases requires us to trust someone, to trust that, oh yeah, they said this.
That is the key. Trust is absolutely the key. You may remember our President Reagan used to say, trust, but verify.
Yeah.
That's very good advice.
Yeah. Well,
because until you verified, you can't really trust. I mean, think about it in that direction.
Yeah.
If you're convinced that your potential opponent actually has something in his hip pocket that's going to do you harm, you don't want to trust him too soon.
Yeah, and that is also the case of trust and capacity. They're completely different things. I'll give an example. If let's say we're we're playing the sports and I have to jump and you catch me, and then when you stand, I trust you, right? Probably you're my grandpa. I'm just giving an example. I trust you. I know you're not going to do anything to me, but I doubt your capacity. even though even though I know that you
So do I, by the way.
yeah. So I think the problem is people confuse intention with capacity. Sometimes you don't have the intention, the thoughts of hurting someone doesn't cross your mind, but the capacity not to, it's not there, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that comes from how we're raised, I think. You
Oh,
know, it depends. You know, as a little boy, often you run into some other little boy that's bigger than you. Yeah. I can tell from your grin that you know what I'm talking about. And,
yeah,
you know, there's not a whole lot of trust involved there.
yeah,
and if he's a lot bigger than you, you know you can't oppose him. So
yeah. Isn't that what we just described nations and countries? That's what we described. Like, oh, if it's too
exactly
big,
so.
you can oppose. And if it's your peer, you're like, okay, you meet a couple of your friends and say our allies and say, okay, if we come together, we'll be able to beat him. And sometimes, despite coming together, the big guy ends up crushing
True.
everyone. Yeah. Wow. We just
Yes.
I think if we talk about kids rivalry, we will end up describing most of the words and country wars and all.
I think you have a valid point. Yeah.
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 I'm,
You can take any major conflict, I think, and reduce it to that.
yeah, yeah. I think the World War One. What happened with World War One wasn't the fact that someone killed someone, or what happened
Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. That's what you're
exactly?
thinking of. Yes.
Yeah, and then it led to countries fighting because
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, you did this to me, or why would you do that? And that happened.
Let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying this conversation and want more thought-provoking ideas straight to your inbox, join the Relatable Wisdom email list. It's free, quick, and filled with bite-sized insights, inspiring quotes, and behind-the-scenes reflections from our guests. Just head to relatablewisdom.com/join. That is relatablewisdom.com/join, or tap the link in the show notes. And hey, subscribing to the podcast helps more than you think, and it's free. So if you haven't already, hit that follow button wherever you're listening. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm currently reading a biography of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was Kaiser in World War One, and it's interesting how he views the world as things are happening leading up to the war. There were incredible tensions that were building. It was like steam building up in a pot with a tight lid. You know, sooner or later something was going to pop because nobody would back down. Example, one of the big issues that the Kaiser had with England and France is they didn't want him, the Kaiser, to build up his navy. You know, at the time, the English had the world's biggest navy by far. They were incredibly powerful. And the Germans felt like they were threatened merely by the fact that the English had those ships. And they wanted to build something that will put them on a par. You see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
You know, I'll build this and I'll build this that's bigger and I'll build that that's even bigger. And pretty soon, seems like if you have a weapon, you want to use it. Now that's another terrible trait.
Isn't that your idea of having a weapon so you can use it?
Yes, exactly so.
The question is, it just happens to be when you use it. But
yes, and how.
Exactly. I'm curious, how did your love for history influence your decision to write an alternative history novel?
Well, that's an interesting question. I started reading history as a youngster. I've always read a lot. I was kind of sickly as a kid, and so I stayed inside a lot when other kids were out playing and doing stuff, so I read. So that influenced a good deal. And then my father was a World War II veteran, and my 4 uncles were all veterans as well. And so anytime there was a family gathering, there were all kinds of these stories that former service guys tell each other, you know, and I was just fascinated with it. And then my dad was a big fan of aircraft. And so he and I used to go out to the local airport a lot just to watch the airplanes. And occasionally we'd see a military one and he'd get all excited and tell me about it, you know, and as a kid, I soaked that up. And so eventually that became a passion of mine. You know, I served in the United States Air Force for 4 years, and then I went to college to become an engineer and worked in aerospace for 34 years. So I had contact with all kinds of people across various military organizations over the years. And plus, I found that as time went on, there was a lot of interest in vintage aircraft, especially from World War II. And so I began following those that would fly and go to museums that were nearby. And I was surprised to learn, there's several pretty good museums right in Colorado where I live.
With Nazi Menace, what were you hoping readers would reflect on after finishing the story?
Well, first of all, my job as a novelist is to entertain them. Okay. That's the first thing I have to do. And if I'm not entertaining, they're not going to read it. I mean, I think that's obvious, right?
Yeah.
So what I have to do is weave the story of the people, which most readers are interested more in the people than the events, and then weave the events into the story. So without them even realizing it, they're learning history.
That's such a clever word.
Sneaky, huh?
Why does it sound like feeding a child vegetables or giving a child one of their drugs? You put it inside the bar and they're like, oh yeah. I was like, oh wow, we swallow it.
Oh no, you figured out my secret.
Yeah. Wow.
Because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Most good stories you'll find, whether it's in a movie or in a novel, have a background of some kind of conflict. Sometimes it's just political. Sometimes it's just two people that can't get along for one reason or another. But it's what it always comes down to. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What's the issue? And how are they going to resolve it? That's the basic of a story. And your characters have to interact with each other and with the situation in a way that's believable. And so I could easily weave in the history by giving the background. If I'm telling a story about you, I need to know where you came from, what you did, where you live, and it makes it much, much more realistic to somebody. Say, oh, this fellow does this. This fellow has this kind of education. He likes this. He dislikes that. He has this lady that he's fond of. That sort of thing. And the more you do that, the more interest there is. But then you fold in the conflict. Maybe there's something going on so that this lady he's fond of, he can't get to, so he has to struggle some way. See, the conflict may be bad weather, a hurricane, a flood, or something like that. You can write a neat story with that. And there have been, there are plenty of bad weather stories out there that you could choose to use as the background for a story. And so I just wove history into a story.
Yeah. Well, alternative history asks the question, what if? Why do you think imagining different outcomes is such a powerful exercise?
Well, because I think people, especially those of us that are younger, like yourself, you look back on some things in history and you see it from a different perspective than the people who lived it. And you say, my goodness, why didn't they do thus and so? It was obvious to you. It might have not have been obvious to them. The what if in my story, in my book, Nazi Menace, is what if the Germans had figured out how to fly a bomber all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and bomb New York City? Well, at first blush, that's ridiculous if you look at the aircraft of the era.
Yeah.
Because many of them had, even the larger airplanes would only be able to make it maybe halfway across, which, the crews don't like that too much. But as the war went on, the technology improved, and they did have the ability to go one way. But again, they don't want to go one way and then, oops, we're prisoners of war now and the enemy that we just bombed. That's not too cool. So I had to figure out, as an engineer, well, how am I going to get these guys to fly all the way across and come back? And what made it an interesting challenge is that I required myself to use the technology of the time. I mean, as an engineer, I could solve that problem easily using the technology we have today. But that's not what they had then.
Yeah.
They had piston engines, they had propellers, and one of the things that a lot of people don't know, here's some history I'm going to sneak in on you. One of the reasons that Germans were often overmatched when it came to aircraft is the fact that they never were able to develop high-octane gasoline.
Huh.
and that made a big difference. German airplanes were probably on the average 20% less powerful for the same size engine as British or American aircraft, just because they didn't have the higher power gasoline. A higher octane gasoline lets you build an engine that has higher compression, which can put out a lot more power. By the end of the World War II, let me give you an example quickly. By the end of World War II, there were American fighter airplanes with engines that developed 3,000 horsepower. I mean, that's still impressive today. The Germans had a few that would do 1,500, some 1,800 horsepower, but they never got to where we or the British did. And that same problem, by the way, affected the Japanese. They were even more restricted in their fuel than the Germans were, and they had both those countries had fine engineers. I'm not denigrating that, but you can't create something if you don't have the ability, the materials to do it with.
If listeners could study just one era or event to better understand today's world, what would you recommend and why?
That's a good question. My goodness. It kind of depends on what point is it that you're trying to make. I think, for example, if you're thinking about colonialism, which all the big European powers involved themselves with, probably American Revolution would be a really good thing to study, because you see on both sides the worst of the effects of colonialization and what people did to free themselves from that kind of bondage. If you're interested in how major powers deal with each other, World War I is a fascinating thing to look at, because there were so many facets to that. It was called a world war because people were involved all around the world. Do you know that there were African nations involved in World War I? Yeah. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah. Well, England, France, and Germany all had colonies in Africa at that time.
So Nigeria fought for the British.
Yes, that's correct. That's why you have the accent you have.
I'm aware of that. Okay. What would you say is one personal lesson from history that has influenced how you make decisions in your own life?
There's an axiom that fighter pilots have used since they came into existence in the First World War, and that's watch your six. That refers to the clock position, and the six for a pilot is directly behind him. It's always a good idea to know what's going on behind you, who's sneaking up on you.
Oh, watch your six. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, in fact, that's a greeting that a lot of aviators use. Check six. When they say goodbye to somebody, check six. Watch out behind you. Who's sneaking up on you?
Well, for someone who thinks history is boring or irrelevant, what would you say to change their perspective?
I think almost anybody can be challenged to learn about history in this way by finding out what things are they interested in. One of my big interests is aviation. So to follow the development of aviation, how quickly it advanced from the Wright brothers, which was, 1903 was their first flight, to 1914 when the World War I broke out. If you look at the difference in the two airplanes developed in that period, it's astonishing how much they changed. And the change in airplanes from the end of World War I to the start of World War II is almost stupefying. That's just one example. What really interests you? Is it agriculture? You can go do a little research on agriculture and learn how people figured out how to grow wheat, for example, that's resistant to wheat rot. And they did it by genetics. And then there's a history of genetics that you could follow. And that's very applicable. I mean, a farmer needs to know whether or not the plant that the crop that he's going to plant is going to survive where he's growing it. Obviously, otherwise he's wasting his time and his money, and he might starve. So, see, there's a history there. You go back and say, well, who has looked into this, and what did they discover? and you'll find out, oh yeah, there's been some people that actually did, studied this. Why does this kind of wheat get rot and this kind doesn't? Interesting.
Yeah, that's such a great way to look at it. Find something you're interested in, and then eventually what you realize is that the other things you need to know will follow the things you want to know. Okay, thank you so much for this conversation and for just chatting with me about history. How can listeners get a copy of the book and also connect with you?
There's two ways. They can go to my website, which is jeffkildow.com, one word, all lowercase, or you can go on Amazon and you'll find my book, which is Nazi Menace. If you just put that in and my name, it'll take you right to there, and it'll give you a description of the book, and it's available right now.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description.
You might even enjoy it.
Okay, we'll
and
see.
not realize you were learning history.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description so the listeners can just go direct to the site. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
It. Thank you for having me. This was delightful. Yes, I enjoyed it very much. Have a great day, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You've been listening to Relatable Wisdom, and I've been your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. You've been listening to the podcast where every story, quote, and insight helps you see life a little differently. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow the show on your favorite podcast app and share it with someone who would love the conversation. For more inspiring voices and timeless wisdom, visit relatablewisdom.com. Until next time, keep living, learning, and collecting wisdom that matters most to you.